Well, hello, and welcome to Success Secrets and Stories for our YouTube channel. It's stories author to authors. And it is my opportunity and pleasure to introduce you to Peter Dingus, who is a science fiction writer. And I think for the most part, I've been intrigued by a little bit of our background that we've talked about on what you've done, Peter. And maybe you can explain a little bit about how your background works so well with your science fiction genre and your new book, The End of the World. Sorry. Please tell us about your background.
Right. Well, I've always been interested in science. Okay. And originally, as a young man, I was an engineer, an electrical engineer. I worked for several large companies. I worked for Raytheon, which was my first job. I worked for Lockheed, and I worked for Textron. And in working as an engineer, I was in a very interesting position. I was in a special projects position, which is sort of like in these big companies, a matrix position. If you come up with some new idea, some new product, and you need some experts that typically, are not grouped, you go into this matrix thing and you get the experts you need. You pull together a group to do stuff. Well, I was in a matrix program like that, and I started working with a couple of physicists from Brown University. And it turns out that I like the physics more than I like the engineering.
Sure.
So I ended up going to graduate school for physics, and I got a PhD in physics from Berkeley. And I became a particle physicist. And my first job was overseas in France, where we were there for 4 years. I was uh, I was uh, I was basically working in an accelerator in Germany in
Wow.
Hamburg called DESI, and I also did a lot of time down at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland, and then coming back to the United States after that, I was a staff physicist at the superconducting super collider in Dallas, Texas, until late 1993 when it shut down.
Wow.
And at that point, I basically went into business with a couple of people. We did some startups, and I just as an intro to the type of science fiction that I write. As we discussed before, I mean, what does a particle physicist do, right? What do they
Right.
actually do on a day-to-day basis? Well, you can either do one or two things. You can build equipment. So we build accelerators, we build detectors, or you can do data analysis. And from a data analysis point of view, what happens in these colliders is that the beams cross, you know, something like 10 times per second. There are millions of events that come out of each crossing, and each of those events have millions and tens of millions of tracks. Now, 99.999% of all of that is just junk that you're not interested in.
Right.
But some of it is new physics. And so when you establish a trigger, they call it a trigger. So you look for certain signals in that event in that maelstrom, and you pare away the background to try and delve into that new physics. You need filters that are good in 1 part in 10 billion. And in order to do that, what we did many years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever, we used a lot of AI. You may think AI is new. It's not new.
No, you were doing it in the 1990s, right?
We're doing it in 1980s,
1980s.
In
And
the 19,
everybody talks about AI being so inventive now.
it's
You
not
guys
new.
were on
Well,
the edge right back
the
there in the 80s.
the original guys who did this were a couple of, some people from MIT.
Sure.
The guy that comes to mind is Marvin Minsky. I read his books back in the 70s. Okay, his the what we call a neural net today, he called a perceptron back in those days. He wrote
Okay.
books like Computation in Finite and Infinite Machines. I mean, this is like old stuff. The thing that's new is the hardware. These
Right.
GPUs, like ultra fast GPUs, that's what's new. And we could go into that, but I should be talking about the
We're
book.
talking about the book, but what's interesting is your experience in the electrical field, in the physics world,
Yeah.
in the data world, has prepared you to write some very interesting books in science fiction. And this book, that the end of the world, and the whole concept of how you saw the Mars program and the GeoMars program, and a lot of the science that's associated with the book. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that, how you came up with those concepts and those theories, especially with the background that you have.
Yeah, well, like we've discussed before, the two things that I'm really interested in the science fiction, okay, is artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
but not the type of artificial intelligence that exists today. A type of artificial intelligence that would really be a conscious being in a box.
Wow. Yeah.
So the idea would be that this wouldn't just be a dead tool like the kind of things that we have today. Like I call them like souped up player pianos. It would be.
Sure.
So what is the essential quality of a real AI? It's the same as the essential quality of a human being. It's a knowledge of its own existence. That's crucial. So in
Yeah.
one of my books, I say, how do you infuse desire in lines of code? How do you
Wow.
do that? We don't know how to do that. That's the answer. We don't know.
Yeah.
But if we could do that, then we would have an entity that we could speak to, right? That would be as dissimilar to us as any conceivable alien. Why is that? The reason is that we as human beings were forged in adaptive evolution, right? So we were given like all of these emotions and whatnot, which are really just uh, an internal thing that compels us to do what biology wants us to do, i.e., reproduce.
Sure.
That's why sex is so strong in human culture. It has to be. It's a biological imperative. That's why
Survival. Right.
survival.
Survival. Right.
Survival. I mean, what biology wants you to do is it wants you to procreate, right?
Continue. Right.
And for instance, we might also imagine one of our fundamental instinctual drivers is fear. Why is that? Because we got to get to an age that enables us to reproduce. So we have to be afraid of the tiger. We have to be afraid of the lion. We have to be afraid of the tribe next door that might take, our land or our resources. Right? So we have all these motivations. Well, think about that entity in a box. It wasn't forged in this maelstrom of adaptive evolution. So it wouldn't have any of these qualities. So now you have a being that knows it exists, that we could speak to, that would be as dissimilar from us as we would be from any alien.
Right.
And its perspective on our objective situation would be amazing. So this is sort of like what I try to put into my stories. I'm really interested in what I call true artificial intelligence, and I'm also interested in genetics because that's sort of like our code, the code that biologically drives a large part of our behavior. So in this book, The End of the World, what I tried to do is, so this is basically the only apocalyptic story that I've ever written. And what I try to do in these books is I try to make them, they're character driven books. I'm really interested in the human condition, right? So imagine you're on this alien, you're on Mars, you're on this other planet. And the way the story opens up is it opens up with the main character, the protagonist. And he's separated himself. He's out there in an environment suit. And you get the sense that he knows that something is coming. And he wants to be alone. And he wants to really kind of get his mind himself prepared for what's coming. And he looks up into the sky on Mars. And he sees the ComSat, which is a satellite that orbits Mars. Because Mars Mars doesn't have it doesn't have an ionization belt because the atmosphere is so thin, or not a very good
Right.
one. So any communications that you have has to be line of sight. You can't bounce it off the ionosphere. So every time that they want to talk to the other base on Mars or to the Earth, they need this ComSat. So he sees the ComSat go overhead, and he goes. They have basically a small geological expedition away from the main camp. He goes back because he knows that something is going to be coming from Earth, and it's going to be awful. And so what happens is that in a very short time, and the way that the reader gets to understand this is because the space station orbiting Earth is basically relaying the information to Mars that there's been an atomic war on Earth, and basically civilization, is going to vanish. And the only thing that's left of the human race are these people on Mars. So the whole story really sort of part of the inspiration for this story was one of my favorite apocalyptic stories written by a British writer, Nigel Shutes, who wrote On the Beach. It was one of my and the thing that made On the Beach so powerful was, suppose you are with a small group of people,
Mm-hmm.
and everything just disappears. Okay, you have a plan for the future. You have people that you want to see again.
Right.
That all just goes away. And if you've ever been in business or in any tight situation, sports, whatever, what you
Sure.
find out is when there's something at stake, the facade that people have when they interact with each other, it just melts away, right? So here we are in this little survey trailer on this desert planet, 40 million miles from a dying world, with this group of people, and we delve deeply into the psyche of this horrible disaster. Each person has their own take on it, and what
And
happens?
you do a very good job of developing the characters. You're developing the characters and giving them a backstory, so readers are actually have the opportunity to. When I think a writing is well done, you have some character connection, and I've noticed in your writing that you do that. You create the background, you create the sympathy, or at least the understanding. You give the backstory of their reactions, so it's an interesting writing style.
I really want the reader to see something of themselves in these stories. I want if you can describe a situation well enough so that it just pulls the reader in, and the reader can become
Yeah.
emotionally involved because there's something of these characters in the reader themselves, and that you really want to make them feel the loss. How would you feel if something like this happened? How would you deal with it? How would you keep your sanity, right? So that's sort of the beginning of the story. But then what ends up happening, and this is where I want to really take it to the limit. What ends up happening is that there was sort of a discovery that was only known to the main character, and for some reason he feels this compulsion. It's a compulsion, and it turns out that the main character becomes, because of his stature in the military, becomes the default leader of the American military, or what's left of America, right? So
Right.
now he's the top dog, and he's because he's had privy to this survey data. There's just something in this data that's driving him in some irrational way. It's scaring him, and it's scaring the other people because since the guy is in charge, what if he's losing his mind, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So he decides with another character, a young woman who's like a brilliant scientist, to go and investigate this phenomenon that some of their survey satellites have found. And what happens? What happened? I'm not going to, I don't want to tell
No,
you
we,
what
we,
happened because
we want
it's,
to read the story, most definitely.
yeah, I mean, it's really, I mean, it's very, very different. What they
But it's
discover,
intriguing. It talks about the characters on whether they're being challenged and the elements of shock, of grief, and of hope. And that's storytelling. That's a very good storytelling. Now, you've also written 3 other books. Maybe we should talk a little bit about some of your other work.
yeah. I want to just say one more thing about the end of the
Oh,
world.
definitely.
It's a novella, and I really recommend. You can either read it in Kindle or you can listen to the audiobook that's done by Brian Pedersen, who's a person in LA, a part-time actor, etc. He's done such a fantastic job of
Awesome.
of bringing this story to life. I mean, it's a little over 2 hours, so it's fairly short. It's a novella, and it was a part of a collection of a set of short stories that actually was on the short list of Chanticleer for the uh, an international prize by the Chanticleer Committee, which is very very well known. And the kind of the interesting thing about this was it was the only collection of science fiction short stories to be considered, and it went all the way to the just below the finalists.
Wow.
So
That's outstanding.
yeah, so it's I'm really really proud of it, and I hope that if you
You have an
like,
image of the cover?
yeah, we sort of discussed this before. Since it's an audio book, it's on a tablet, and so it's going to be the image is not going to be that easy to see over the over our link, but I'll do my best. You know. There we
A
go.
a
Yeah,
little bit there. Yeah, that's see.
right,
I can.
right.
It's actually a pretty good image. That
Yeah.
works.
All right, good. Yeah, it's a beautiful cover, by the way. I really like what they've done with it. Yeah, so another one of my books, the one that kind of preceded this one, which actually this is a very interesting book. So it's called Deep Time, and let me tell you something about Deep Time.
Okay.
Yeah, let me tell you something about Deep Time. It actually won the Story Trade Award for the best science fiction of 2024.
Wow.
And right now, it's a Chanticleer finalist, and which is an international award. Um, it could win the best science fiction and Chanticleer for 2024. Um,
Outstanding.
so this is a really an interesting book. The protagonist of this book is a young woman, and you basically it's 300 some odd years in the future.
Wow.
And what it supposes is that climate change has completely devastated the earth. And what's happened is that corporations, because they handle a lot of the resources, have become the dominant entity on Earth. So
Yeah.
we sort of go back to what we call the Gilded Age, and I don't know if a lot of people know what America was like around the turn of the century. But you had guys like Andrew Carnegie, U.S. Steel, who basically, if you work for Andrew Carnegie, you're almost like an indentured servant. You were
Oh
living
yeah.
in his housing barracks. You were paid like very little. You could never sort of buy your way out of that life.
Right.
And and Andrew Carnegie had this thing where he basically said, I think people are so dumb that I'm not, if I pay them a lot of money, they're just gonna blow it. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to build institutions like libraries and whatnot where they can educate them. So it's a better use of the money. So that was his attitude towards people in general. The other thing that happened back in those days was, let's say that you weren't happy with your job at U.S. Steel and you got together and you tried to make a union, or you tried to get some benefits, or you didn't want your 12-year-old kid to work 14-hour days. you're causing trouble, right?
Right.
Production was going down. Steel at that point had become something really important for civil, because you couldn't build like these big buildings without steel.
Right.
This was the first time that you know, um, they had applied something with the strength of steel to build it, so they could build these, like the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building in New York.
Right.
So what would happen? What would happen is the laborers were causing trouble. So if you were Andrew Carnegie, what you did was you called up the Pinkertons. So the Pinkertons was this
Okay.
sort of like private police force. They used to, they wore black suits and derbies. They carried pistols and machine guns and blackjacks. And they'd come to the factory and they'd beat the crap out of the guys, shoot a couple of them until things calmed down and you get back to work, right? So in the story, Deep Time, 300 years in the future, because of the lousy environment, big corporations basically dominate the world, and you work for these big corporations in arcologies, which are basically protected from the environment, and so you're safe, right?
Right.
And the way
And
the way
trapped.
yeah, and trapped, yeah, and the way this works is in the case of this young woman, her dad gets killed. He works for the company. Her dad gets, and the way the contracts are structured is that people in your family who can serve the company pick up the contract. So these are generational contracts. You can buy your way out, but very few people can do that. So at the age of 13, they come to the house, and over the objections of her mother, they take the girl and they give her aptitude test, and they find out that what she's best suited for is to be in the corporate police, in their military police force. And they take her to a space station where they change her biologically. They put all kinds of like implants and whatnot so she can control, military equipment. I mean, you can control it using your mind. They put so they invest millions of dollars, or the equivalent of millions of dollars. They call a person like her wetware. And so the story basically is her struggling to hang on to her humanity, because she had ideas about what she wanted to be, what she imagined her future to be, because aside from these arcologies, they also have places on Earth they call free towns, where people have bought their way out of these companies and whatnot, and actually, they live an unencumbered life. It's a hard life because of the environment, and they still require the company for certain things. But anyway, to make a super long story short, she becomes one of these policemen. She finds herself on Mars, basically under the umbrella of the company, putting down a labor uprising, and so there she is holding a gun on these workers, and she realizes that she has become the people that took her away, when she was a young girl, and she refuses to shoot these people, right? And so because she refused to do it, her squad and the military people, they don't trust her. So just like in the time of Rome, if you were a Roman soldier and you went sideways, they'd send you to the salt mines. Well, the story starts with her on a moon of Saturn, Titan, mining ore 2 kilometers under the methane ice. That's how the story starts.
Wow.
Because she and they turned off all the stuff, all of the cybernetics that they put on her, and that's how the story actually starts. But what ends up happening is that there is a discovery on Titan of an alien artifact, and she's like in the right place at the wrong time, and in some way becomes associated with this alien artifact, and that's how. And what happens is that that Saturn and Titan are sufficiently far from Earth that they also have started a free society, and there's going to be a conflict between the companies on Earth and this society because it's life uh, in this society is so attractive that it's bleeding off talent from the company, so they have to put a stop to it. And so the entire story is her, basically in this interesting relationship with this alien artifact and this conflict between this free society on Saturn and the Earth corporations that want to put it down.
It's a
And
great storytelling development. I mean, that's awesome.
yeah, no,
Really outstanding.
it's a really good story, and I highly, highly recommend it.
That's awesome. So, a couple other quick questions. And for me, the sense of being able to develop all these characters, their names, the complexity of it, from an author's perspective, how did you do that? Because this
That's a really interesting question. A long time I read like a lot of books. Right? I was a big science fiction fan.
that might be one of the biggest clues there is reading.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, if you want to write stories, you need to read a lot of stories. So I read a long time ago. I read a book. It's a really fantastic book by an author that probably a lot of people know, famous woman, Ursula Le Guin. It was called The Left Hand of Darkness. I mean, I highly recommend it. It's
Wow.
an incredible book. Anyway, she spends the first 20 or 30 pages answering this question that you just asked. How did I come by this story? Because it's a pretty wild story. She basically said, I was sitting in my office one night having a drink, and I heard the door open, and I turned, and the main character came in, closed the door behind him, sat on my desk, told me the story, and I just wrote it down. Yeah, and there's a lot of truth to that. There
Wow.
really is a lot of truth. The only thing I knew about Deep Time is I knew how it ended. When I started writing it, the only thing I knew about it was how it ended.
Okay.
And I started writing about somebody that would end that way. And the characters they come to life. They really do. I mean, it's not like, I'm gonna sketch this out and I want this person to be X, Y. No, they actually come to life. And they tell you what they're going to do. And you just write it down. I mean,
So do you have like a notepad next to the bed? Is this like when you get the inspiration sometimes when you wake
no,
up,
it just
or is it
comes.
just during
No,
the day? Wow.
it just comes, man. I've always been surprised by people. Oh, I have writer's block. I can't even imagine writer's block. I mean, once you get
Wow.
into a story,
Yeah.
it's like watching a movie. I mean, you're in it, and you can't wait because this character is telling you, hey, this is happening. Write it down quick. you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. A little bit of mine was my first book is more technical. The second one I'm doing a business novel. So I'm having some fun doing character development and talking about a storyline and having some fun on how that interplays. And at some level, I don't have the talent that you have, but at some level, the story does kind of develop itself and its own
well,
complexities.
believe me, John, I've written a lot of like technical papers. And
Okay. Yeah.
that doesn't happen in a technical paper. In a technical
No.
paper, you do exactly what you said. You have their notepad. You sit there. You do your research. You go to the next thing. You look at your data. Blah blah blah. Right.
Right.
That's why I started writing stories, because when you write these stories, it's just like I mean, as a human being, you just get into it
Yeah.
so much deeper. You know what I mean? There's
I
an
do.
intellect.
Yeah.
There's an intellectual piece, where you're writing these scientific papers and doing the calculation. Okay, I like that a lot, but it's a completely different feeling.
Now, especially since you've worked with what I find interesting from a scientific side of it, you worked with data, but you also had to be able to understand a story or what the information was telling you, literally. That ability to translate, the ability to try to make some sense of direction I think that helps a little bit in terms
Yeah,
of what you're trying to do too.
let me tell you, when I wrote Deep Time, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but we sent a spacecraft out to Saturn. It's called Cassini.
Hmm.
And the Cassini spacecraft, I mean, the data that came, I spent like 2 months looking at that data before I wrote Deep Time. So a lot of the
Wow.
stuff in Deep Time about Saturn and Titan,
Yeah.
it's legit. It's not baloney, you know. It's really legit. And I try to paint a picture. You're going to find out things about Saturn and Titan that are going to blow your mind, you know. I mean, I'll just give you like one little tidbit, you know. Just one of the things that really messes people up in space is the lack of gravity. I mean, you really need gravity as a human being to function correctly, or you
Right.
just kind of deteriorate. I mean, everything, your metabolism, your bones, everything, they go to hell. Well, interestingly enough, the density of Saturn, it's a very low density planet. I mean, if you were to take Saturn and just put it in water, it would float. That's it. You know, if you took the Earth and you put it in water, it sinks. It's a rock, right? You take
Right.
Saturn, which is a gas giant, you put it in water, it would float, right? So it's a massive planet. It's huge. But since its density is so low, you go like, 500 kilometers into the atmosphere. If you build a floating city, the gravity is exactly the same as the gravity on Earth, almost 1G.
Wow.
So there you are. You're just walking around, in this thing, and there are floating cities in Saturn on the book, and I tell you how they work, and it's really fascinating, you know.
Awesome. So you've written kind of like what's interesting is a short story and then a developed novel, both interesting books. And you have two other books, right?
Yeah, I want to say my first one was Proteus Rising, and that's heavily into genetics, right? Above the first chapter of Proteus Rising, and it's a fantastic book. I really, 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 when I finished it and I reread it, I said, "This is exactly what I wanted to write."
That's
Above,
awesome.
yeah, above the first chapter, the main character says, "What if I told you that I had found a genetic cure for original sin?" Okay. And
Okay.
what I mean by that is not a religious connotation, but we talked about the human condition, right? And we have a lot of problems. We have personal problems, we have problems in our government, we have problems in the world. So you say, is there like some fundamental reason? And these problems, if you look at history, they're really recurring. They're no accident. They sort of,
No.
it's like the same story. Or
Yeah, we
we're
have a
like,
bad habit of repeating it, right?
yeah, we're like little gerbils running on this cage, right?
A very big
so,
wheel, but I
so,
do get that feeling of being a gerbil sometimes. Yes.
so what I mean by original sin in this context is, what is it about us, right, that makes these terrible things happen, right? So what if you could change genetics in such a way to fix that? That's the
Yeah.
basis of this story. And it's heavily, one of the main characters in it is a quantum computer, is a sentient quantum computer. And that character, I just love that character. That character is really like where, we were talking before about having a brain in a box that understood that its own existence. And I really delved deeply into that idea in Proteus Rising. And I just want to say, what is Proteus? Proteus was a Greek demigod
Right.
who survived by shape shifting. So the reason it's called Proteus Rising is because in this book, the human being becomes something else. Yeah, so.
I just personally I find this conversation, and I'm a science fiction fan at heart,
Yeah.
and just the complexity in which you've created these stories. I want to read more. I mean that is probably the best thing I can do within this series of talking to authors. I I have found the science fiction piece close to my heart too,
Yeah.
and I'm intrigued. I think that's the most important thing for a reader to understand. There's some fun and there's some science. And whenever you're a reader and you're looking into a science fiction genre, what you don't want is something completely fluff and imaginary, because you don't want it to be a fairy tale. There has to be some context of science that's associated with it.
Well,
I think you've done a very good job of doing that.
I think the for me, what works for me is that I want my own experience as a human being to somehow resonate with this story.
Yeah.
I don't live like in an imaginary world. I live in a world that's real to me. I've had real associations with other people. I've had real associations with the world at large. And in order for me to resonate with a story, there has to be that air of reality, because
Right.
then if it becomes real for me, then it becomes emotional.
I think that's how your characters sit down and talk to you.
Yeah,
I think there's the element of, here's some of the facts that you need to understand about me. I can imagine a little bit of what that might sound like.
yeah,
So awesome.
yeah,
Is there anything that you would like to talk about as far as what people can look at in terms of your website and how they
yeah,
can get a hold of your information?
yeah. My website is, I'm going to say it really slowly.
Okay.
www. Okay. Speculative Science Fiction Review. One word.
Wow.
Speculativesciencefictionreview.com. And one of the things about the website, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to put this interview up there.
That'd be great.
But one of the things about the website is, not only does it have reviews of the stories and things about the stories and whatnot, it also has, like, every book, it has one chapter that you can listen to in an audio sense. It has a short story that that's not in any of the books, called The Crystal, which is about alien contact, my take on alien contact. And it also has, like, a link because I write on Medium. I write actual essays on Medium. So it has a
Wow.
link to my essays on Medium, where I write stuff about particle physics, about quantum physics, quantum. There's one article called Quantum Reality. I have a couple of articles on artificial intelligence, my take on artificial intelligence. I have a whole bunch of articles, so you can read those too.
Outstanding. And you also, your audiobook and your books are available on
Uh,
Amazon and
yeah, my books, not my audiobook, but my books are available on Amazon, but they're also distributed by Ingram. So
okay.
you could actually order them in any bookstore. You can get
Awesome.
them. You can order them at Barnes and Noble. You can order them at Woolworths. You know,
Wow.
you can get them. So you of course you can get them at Woolworths. I meant Walmart.
Well,
See,
okay.
you can tell how old I am.
Yeah,
Wait, I don't even know if
unfortunately, I'm
Woolworths.
from the same generation. I'm thinking,
I don't
oh,
even
it's
know. I don't even
okay.
know if that exists anymore. Yeah,
I don't think so.
Walmart. Yeah. So yeah.
But the
Okay.
audiobooks are available on what format?
They're available at Audible, iTunes, and Amazon.
Awesome. Awesome. So, is there anything in closing you'd like to say to your fans and to the readers that you have, and maybe anticipating your new book?
Yeah, I mean, I just hope that if you're a science fiction fan, that you'll give it a chance. See if you like it or not. And if you don't see, this is the thing that I've really tried to do. If you don't typically read science fiction, but you like suspense, you like techno thrillers, you like drama, give it a try. Even
Yeah.
the book of short stories, which is Worlds in Transition, give it a try. I think because in the past, in the 50s and 60s and what, or even going back like H.G. Wells, who, you know, I don't I
Right.
don't want to I don't want to diss Mary Shelley, because Mary Shelley was probably the first science fiction. But H.G. Wells, you know, really popularized it. And, you know, he used to go around to world leaders and discuss society, you know. Um, you know, when things happen in our time, you know, we looked at things like 1984, Brave New World, George Orwell, you know, these kinds
Right.
of things.
Right.
I mean, it's. I think that I would love to see a more general readership embrace some science fiction, because I think there's a lot there. You know, I think
Agreed.
there's a lot. Yeah. So
And I think, yeah, if I can capstone it, Peter, I think you're a very good storyteller. And I think that's the part that people, if they're looking for a story that's developed, a story that has um, context and has some spirit to it, and great development, you're a very, very good storyteller at the same time. So I'd like to also stamp the approval of a great writer, and
thank you so much.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak. So,
Thank you.
in conclusion, huh, just to wrap it up, this is Stories Author to Author, and it's been a lot of fun to talk to Peter. They're great books. Uh, and remember that creative minds and creative thought create creative stories. And it's storytelling that we are most intrigued by. So next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep sharing those stories. See you soon.
Bye bye.